Welcome. If everybody could get their refreshments and come on down. Um, Welcome to the Eanes History Group. We are a ragtag bunch of people who enjoy most anything, but we particularly like history. And we get together the second Monday of every month here at the library, usually. And we have a program of interest on some aspect of history. Sometimes it's very local, it's hyper local, like a specific ranch right here under our nose in the Eanes School District. Sometimes it has to do with Austin, like the flood of 1900 and the dam there at Low Water Crossing. And sometimes we branch out to Texas. And today is one of those days where we're branching out a little bit, but I'm really, really excited about that. Before we get started, I wanted to apologize for the parking or the lack thereof. I don't know what's going on today, but it must be bring everybody you know to the library day. So I know that was difficult. Thank goodness the high school is not in session, and so there's a little bit of overflow available on the street. And the second thing I wanted to do was see who can tell me what this is. It's a dipper or a ladle. And where might it be used?
Be still.
There's one in every group.
Bean pot.
A bean pot, but I heard here a water well. I wanted to see if this made any of you think of summer. Summer when you were a kid. That my granddaddy had a farm in the middle of nowhere in rural Georgia. And he had a spring on that farm. And so he poured some concrete. Farms love their concrete. So he poured a concrete rectangle and that spring opened into it. It was the best water you've ever put in your mouth. And this is how everybody using the same dipper access that water. So over the weekend, I was cleaning out or going through a box of things that I brought back from Georgia when I cleared out my parents' home last summer. And I found this, and it just brought me back to summer all over again. So I thought I would share this with you and see if it brought back memories for any of you. And also to say, if you find things like this, think of me. I'm not sure what we'll do with it, but we will see how it relates to history and how it fits into the story of this community. So please remember us. Okay. Now we're ready for our treat today. And let me start by making sure that you know that Jeff has asked for you to hold your questions and he'll try to address them all at the end. This group's a pretty chatty group. So if they can't go by that rule, at least I asked you. But our speaker today, as you know from the communication, is the director of the Texas Military Forces Museum at Camp Mabry. That, for a long time, I would drive on Mopac past Camp Mabry and I would see the airplanes and the tanks and the guns. And I thought that was all that the museum might be. Well, back 4 or 5 years ago, a group from this group, we did a field trip over to the Texas Military Forces Museum. And oh my gosh, what an absolute treasure that museum is. And as I said to Jeff before we got started, it's not planes and guns. It's actually the stories. It is the amazing stories of the thoughts and the feelings and the heroic efforts of men and women who have served our country beginning in 1823, I think is when the earliest it goes back. And that was when a militia was mustered in Stephen F. Austin's colony, 1823. And it goes through all of the conflicts and all of the time periods, both at war and in peace since then. And the reason it's such an amazing museum is one, because the stories are so good, but it's also a great museum because of Jeff Hunt. He came 19 years ago to the museum and inherited a bunch of planes and guns. And so it has been under his leadership that the museum has turned into the absolute community treasure that it is. And one of the reasons he's been able to do that is because he's a real historian. We kind of play at being historians. We enjoy it. We enjoy it immensely. But he is a real historian. And in fact, he is a noted Civil War historian, and several years ago was voted the #1 Civil War historian in the whole country. So, I mean, we are talking an accomplished. I was fascinated to read that he's also an accomplished reenactor. So if he goes into character, we shouldn't be surprised. But that requires a certain skill, and what a great way to be involved in the story. So without further ado, let me turn the program over to Jeff Hunt, Director of the Texas Forces Military Museum.
This is my 21st century museum director impression that I'm wearing today. So I appreciate the invitation to be here. One of the fun things about my job, and is that good enough? Can you all hear me? Okay. One of the fun things about my job is getting to go out and talk to people who share my passion for history. And of course, Camp Mabry has a lot of history. Camp Mabry is one of those places that everybody who lives in Central Texas hears about twice a day if you watch the news, right? Because they report the weather from Camp Mabry because we have a weather station there. That's what a weather station looks like. You drive by, you don't even notice it. That's where they tell you how hot it was or how much rain or no rain happened, that sort of thing. So people hear about Camp Mabry all the time. And if you drive down 35th Street, you pass the old main entrance to Camp Mabry. And if you drive along Mopac, as Ellen was saying, you see the helicopters and the jets that are out there on the parade ground. And so Camp Mabry has a presence, but a lot of people don't know what Camp Mabry actually is, let alone the history of Camp Mabry. We talk to people all the time that tell us, I thought that was a Boy Scout campground or a KOA or something like that. It's like, no. Camp Mabry is a little bit more distinguished than that. It is, in fact, the headquarters of the Texas Military Department and the Texas Military Forces. So what do we mean by that? We mean that the Adjutant General's headquarters are at Camp Mabry. The headquarters of the Texas Army Guard are at Camp Mabry. The headquarters of the Texas Air National Guard are at Camp Mabry. The headquarters of the 36th Infantry Division are at Camp Mabry. And the headquarters of the Texas State Guard are at Camp Mabry. So Camp Mabry is not an installation that has units posted there. It's a headquarters. It's the brain center of the second largest National Guard force in the United States. 22,000 men and women spread across all those organizations, and of course, physically spread across the whole country. Only California's National Guard is numerically larger than the Texas National Guard, but no National Guard force in the United States has more capability than the Texas Guard. We have paratroopers, we have armor, we have artillery, we have infantry, we have special forces, we have air, we have helicopters, both attack helicopters and transport helicopters. We have underwater capabilities as well, and no state deploys its troops more often overseas than the Texas National Guard does. At the height of the war on terror in Iraq and Afghanistan, we essentially had a brigade in theater, a brigade mobilizing to go into theater, and a brigade coming back from theater at any given moment for a span of about 6 years. And today, as we stand here, we have troops in Kuwait, in Syria, and various other places engaged in hostilities at this moment. And a lot of us tend to forget because it doesn't impact us very much. We are at war. We have been at war since 9/11, and whether it's going hot or it's sort of running cold and under the radar, the Texas Guard has been engaged in that. We have the 111th Fighter Squadron, or used to be Fighter Squadron, down in Ellington Field. They don't fly jets anymore. They fly drones. and they operate them from Ellington Field, and they were flying them over Iraq and Afghanistan and attacking enemy troops on a daily basis. And the most dangerous part of the war for those pilots was their drive through Houston rush hour traffic to Ellington back and forth. So it's the world is a different place than it was when Camp Mabry first came into existence. So how do we get Camp Mabry? Why is there a Camp Mabry? Well, in the immediate aftermath of the American Civil War, no state that had seceded from the Union was allowed to have a militia. Texas, of course, had been the seventh, the last of the original 7 southern states to go out of the Union. So between 1865 and 1870, there was no Texas militia. In 1870, that restriction was lifted. The southern states could have their militias again, and Texas created what was called the Volunteer Guard. It was your sort of standard state militia. All states were required by law to have them. Most state laws said all able-bodied adult men are in the militia. They're supposed to arm themselves and equip themselves, and that's why those things had fallen by the wayside a long time ago. But the militia was the state's military force capable of being called into service by the governor whenever an emergency occurred. The name of the militias varied from state to state. Some, like Texas, said Volunteer Guard, some said State Guard, some said National Guard. But of course, these forces were not really militarily capable of doing very much. The militia had always had a sort of problem associated with it. When you called up the militia, you pulled all the men out of the economy, which caused all sorts of economic problems. The militia could therefore serve for relatively short periods of time, generally close to where it originated. And when you fought big wars, the American Revolution, the War of 1812, the American Civil War, you raised volunteer regiments who signed up for a year or 2 or 3 or the duration of the war to go off and do the fighting. So the militia was the short-term emergency force. In the North and the Midwest, it was really good at dealing with breaking strikes, and with civil unrest. In the South, it was race riots that usually got the militia called out, and that was its primary function. The Volunteer Guard of Texas was like a lot of the state militias in that it had no funding. The state of Texas gave the Volunteer Guard no money. The federal government gave the Volunteer Guard no money. The most that the feds did for us was to hand over some fast-growing, outdated equipment left over from the American Civil War. And with no money, no budget to work with, the state militias had to basically fund themselves. So they had to do all sorts of things to raise money, to buy their uniforms, to buy their equipment, to pay for the rent on their armories, to pay utilities, to pay travel, to go to training, that sort of thing. And so the Volunteer Guard spent a lot of time fundraising. And it did reenactment battles, and it did, dances and balls and competitions, anything it could sell a ticket to. Well, obviously, if you're spending all your time selling tickets to things, you're not training to be a soldier. And that feeds into a big argument that happens in the United States in the late 1880s through the 1890s about whether or not the state militia should be done away with. And those who opposed them pointed out that the militia system, which had made sense perhaps before, say, the 1830s, had been defunct for a very, very long time. It was all but useless in the event of a real war, and they argued that all the militia was good for was busting strikes, busting unions, dealing with race problems, and as a result, why was any effort being made toward the militia at all? The Army was very small. It was only about 25,000 men. Who were we going to fight? Canada was a friend. Mexico wasn't a threat. The Navy was the real defense of the country. And the Army was starved for money and starved for attention. And it wanted whatever money was available, whatever attention was available to go toward it, to focus on the regular Army and not on these state militias. And this was all a big argument that the country was having politically. The state militias, of course, were politically very well connected. The governors didn't want to get rid of the state militias. The people who were in the state militia didn't want them to go away. Prominent citizens who got to be majors and colonels and whatnot didn't want that prestige to go away. So there's a lot of pushback And for about a decade, this argument swayed back and forth in the country. And one of the people who was in favor of keeping the state militias, but understood the argument that the regular force was making against them, was the Adjutant General, and that is Brigadier General Woodford Mabry. I don't see if we can get rid of that thing there so that it's not bothering you. These things pop up. Okay, well, it's not really there apparently.
I escaped.
Did I make it go away? Well, hang on a second. Ain't technology great? Okay, we'll just get rid of everything and see if that makes it go away. VPN status. No, I don't want to turn on VPN. Okay.
There we go.
Did it go? All right. Well, maybe it'll pop away and we'll just have to live with it. Oh, now you're asking me to deal with all kinds of technology. We'll be here another 15 minutes. Okay, so my apologies for that. Woodford Mabry, graduate of the Virginia Military Institute. He was the Adjutant General of Texas. He said, if the state militias are going to hang around, they have to be viable military forces. They have to be able to step in and aid the Army in the event of a real war. And that means they have to be militarily capable of doing that. And he recognized that the Texas Volunteer Guard was not, that the regulars were right about what they were saying. And so he begins to professionalize the force. There are now exams that you have to take if you want to be an officer, stay an officer. The same thing if you want to be a non-commissioned officer. Units had to have so many men, and they had to show up once a month for drill if they were going to maintain their accreditation and these sorts of things. And one of the things he insisted was that all of the companies in the state's volunteer guard, in order to remain in existence and to be officially recognized, had to attend a 2-week summer encampment every year. The difficulty with that was there was no place to hold it because the volunteer guard owned no property, had no military installation. And so they were kind of at the mercy of finding some landowner who would be willing to turn his property over to the troops for a couple of weeks every summer. And who knows if you could find him, where that property would be, whether it would be convenient or not. And so they decided that they needed to have a permanent facility. And a committee was formed, and they went out looking for land. There were lots of places in Texas that wanted that facility to be next door to it. But Austin won out. Austin won out because there were people who lived close to the city, relatively speaking, who were willing to either sell or donate the land. And that land was adjacent to get back over here, was adjacent to the Colorado River. So you had a water source and the Missouri and Pacific Railroad. And the railroad, of course, was the way that troops and supplies and whatnot moved around in the 19th century. And so the decision was made to accept that offer of land, which at the time was well outside the city. So there's the UT Tower, there's the Capitol, here's the parade ground at Camp Mabry. So today, of course, Camp Mabry's in the middle of Austin, very much in the middle of Austin, right? At the time, this was well outside the city limits, but it met all of the military criteria. There was varying terrain. Some of it was flat, some of it was hilly. You have the river, you have the railroad. This was perfect. And so the land was accepted. And in 1892, they held the first militia muster out there. And the troops voted to name the installation after General Mabry. And so it becomes Camp Mabry. In military parlance, a camp is supposed to be a temporary installation. A fort is a permanent installation. Camp Mabry's been around for more than 100 years. It's pretty permanent. But in the Guard, everything's still a camp. The Guard doesn't have forts. The Guard has camps. And so that's the distinction that you have there. This does not mean that all of the problems for the volunteer guard goes away. That argument politically is still happening. There's still no money coming. They're still having to raise the funds for training and all this sort of stuff. And so Camp Mabry becomes a focal point of the community. They built this gorgeous grandstand out there. They built several. They kept catching fire and burning down. That was a common problem. But people would come from all around to see battle reenactments, and polo matches and other things that happened on the grounds of Camp Mabry. They would sell tickets to them. This was only supposed to be one day of the 2-week training period. All the rest was actually given to training, but on this one day, it was an open house. The public was invited, and they could pay tickets and they could come and see all this stuff. Of course, we still do battle reenactments at Camp Mabry several times over the course of the year. So that tradition lives. Just at this time, they're free. We're not paying for the Texas National Guard with our battle reenactments. And so the argument continues. 1898, you get the Spanish-American War. And the Spanish-American War, Texas was asked to raise 4 regiments of infantry and 1 regiment of cavalry. The Volunteer Guard was invited to enlist, and a lot of it said, no, thank you. We're not really interested in going to a real war. And some of the most prominent units in the Volunteer Guard, like the Houston Light Guard, which had a lot of very prominent social people in it, didn't go. And so the Army said, see, we told you. These guys are useless in terms of fighting a war. Now, the Spanish-American War only lasted 113 days. Texas does raise its 4 regiments of infantry, 1 of cavalry. General Mabry resigns as the adjutant general. He had never been to war, so he becomes the colonel of the 1st Texas United States Volunteers. And he and his regiment get as close to the war as anybody can from Texas, because it ends before they can get into action. So they're in Jacksonville, Florida, when the war ends. They do get to go occupy Havana for 4 months. While they're there, General Mabry catches yellow fever and he dies. So that's the end of his story. Congress grants his wife a lifetime pension and Irish service. And of course, Camp Mabry is his real legacy. But we have his uniform, we have his sword, his cap, all of that on exhibit at the museum. So the fight about the Volunteer Guard, the state militias, didn't end before General Mabry passed away, but he did ultimately wind up on the winning side. And in 1903, the National Guard is created by act of Congress. And the deal was, all right, if we're going to keep these state forces, then they have to be trained like regular troops. We're going to arm them like regular troops. We're going to equip them like regular troops. We're going to let their officers go to the regular Army schools and all that. It was grand in theory, didn't really work the way it was supposed to, and wouldn't really work completely the way it was supposed to until after 9/11. Before the Guard was literally equipped and trained exactly like the regular force. Today, we have what's called a modular army, which makes sense for a nation of computer users. We plug and play. So special mission, what do we need? We need infantry, we need armor, we need special forces. Grab those from anywhere, including the Guard, plug them into one structure, send them off to do the mission. When the mission's done, unplug all of it, throw those resources back to where they came from. So today, you could have a Marine general commanding Army units and Navy units and supported by Air Force units and Air National Guard units, all under the command of that Marine general, or mix it all around. Everybody can talk to everybody with their radios. Everybody has the same equipment. The logistics work the way that they should if you have a unified force. But it took a long, long time to get there. But General Mabry's vision, and the vision of a lot of other people, will eventually in fact, come true. So the National Guard is created, and Camp Mabry becomes the headquarters of the Texas National Guard. And over the years, Camp Mabry begins to evolve and grow. So there's what the old main entrance used to be. The first building shows up in 1915. This is today what we call Building 42. If you are familiar with the military, the way they number buildings on an installation makes no sense whatsoever. So all the 40s are over here. No, they're not. They're scattered everywhere, right? But this was the state arsenal. And so this is the building that is closest to Mopac. If you drive down Mopac going south, those are the tracks of the Missouri Pacific Railroad. You get Mopac its name, right? A third of this building is gone because they had to cut it away to build the Mopac Expressway. The rest of the building is still there. Before this building was constructed, all of the munitions and weaponry of the Texas National Guard, before that the Volunteer Guard, were kept in a fireproof building on the grounds of the state capitol. So they took the weapons away from the immediate proximity of the politicians, probably a good idea, and they brought them out to Camp Mabry. The second oldest building that was built on the post is what we call the Bluebonnet House. This is a pretty little craftsman house that was constructed right after that state arsenal. It's had many uses on Camp Mabry. It was the post headquarters. It was the first post hospital. Today, it's an office. And then comes World War I. And during World War I, they have something at Camp Mabry called the School of Automotive Mechanics, or SAM for short. And that was a joint venture between the University of Texas and the United States War Department to teach soldiers to work on the then cutting edge technology of the internal combustion engine. It was an 8-week-long course. And they taught the men to work on trucks and to work on automobiles. And while they were there, they had to feed them, of course, and they had to house them. And they also had to control them. So the headquarters building is constructed. That's still there. That's still the headquarters. That's where the adjutant general sits. They had to have a hospital. So they built a hospital. This is now our VIP quarters. It's been turned into, nice hotel, basically. And they had to feed the troops. They had to feed the troops 3 hot meals a day. So they built what comes to be known as Building 6. And Building 6 will eventually house the museum. It's a 45,000 square foot structure. It was constructed in 3 months. In just 3 months, they put up this 45,000 square foot building. Today, we could not let the contract for the environmental impact study to think about building a building of that size in 3 months. But it was wartime, and anything was possible. And they fed 4,000 hot meals a day in that structure. So it had soup kitchens, it had bakeries, and all of that sort of stuff. The cool thing about these picnic tables is that center board comes off. So you took all the trash and you scooped it into the middle so you could sweep it all up. 4,000 hot meals a day, and it stays a mess hall all the way until the 1930s. It has a twin too. During World War I, there was something called Penn Field in South Austin on the grounds of what is today St. Edward's University. And that was where they were going to teach men to fly and work on the radios that they were going to start putting into airplanes, that kind of stuff. They never got anybody trained there because the war ended before they could really get it going. But they knew that they were going to have to feed people, so they built another mess hall that looks exactly like ours. And if you don't understand that, sometimes you get confused by the pictures, but there are no oak trees around this building. We got lots of oak trees. So if you see trees, it's Camp Mabry. If you don't see trees, it's Penn Field. This is long gone. Camp Mabry, of course, and our building are still there. There was a water tower that was installed, and the water tower is sort of right behind the museum. So if you look sort of to the north, this right here would be the perimeter of the post in what today is Mopac. And so they built a bunch of barracks. Most of those are there. These things are gone. Most of these buildings are still there. And there's the water tower in 1923. This is Building 6. That's what's going to become the museum. Note these clear stories on it. So there's no climate control, right? So those have functional windows, and you open them up and you vent all of the heat. It worked pretty well. Those were blown off by a tornado in the 1980s, and we put them back up in 2008, 2009, but the windows don't work because we have air conditioning now. We don't need to open them. So our building stays a mess hall until the 1930s. In the 1930s, the Texas legislature creates the Department of Public Safety. For the first 20 years of its history, DPS is headquartered here at Camp Mabry, and they were in a building right across the parking lot from the museum. And when they show up on Camp Mabry, the Building 6, which was a mess hall, was turned over to them, and they used it as an automobile and radio repair shop. So they bricked up a bunch of the doors and some of the windows, and they put 2 great big white wooden doors in so they could drive vehicles in and out of the structure. And the building remains a automobile and radio repair shop until the 1950s. In the early 1950s, 1952, DPS at Camp Mabry went to its current digs down over by the Big Half Price Books on Koning 2222. And at that point, Building 6 is given back to control of the Guard. Camp Mabry, of course, continues to evolve. This is the water tower looking toward the north. So there's the Capitol building right there. There's Building 1. There's the post hospital. The armory would be over here. Some of these other buildings, you can see all the tents. And then we look to the north and we can see all those buildings. This would be the DPS headquarters right here. This building would burn down. The nice bleachers are gone, burned down, and so they've got those little ones so they can watch you play polo out on the playground, because we had cavalry now, and cavalry is a great way, or polo is a great way to train cavalrymen to be good horsemen. In the 1930s, during the Great Depression, the Works Progress Administration comes out to Camp Mabry. Most of the stuff they do initially is beautification. They're making things look pretty at Camp Mabry. Nothing that is militarily really significant. You get a new guard shack, that's building 1. These buildings, of course, all of this is still here. And then World War II starts. And when World War II starts, the construction begins to take on more purpose. And so these buildings here are the ones, so there's your railroad, right? So here's Mopac. These are you drive past these all the time, and the helicopters and the jets are out here on the parade ground. These buildings were part of an ordnance shop that operated at Camp Mabry during World War II. So it's still the headquarters of the Guard, but the Guard has been mobilized, right? The 36th Infantry Division has been mobilized. The 112th and 124th Cavalry have been mobilized. They're in federal service. So the Guard is gone. The State Guard, initially called the Defense Guard, is stood up. Those are mostly World War I veterans who are too old to serve in the regulars, and young men who are too young to be in the regulars yet. And they sort of take over the role of the Guard while it is in federal service. This is still the primary function of the State Guard, is that the whole Texas Army Guard is mobilized. The Texas State Guard cannot be mobilized into federal service. So it's to stay here in Texas and to deal with hurricanes and floods and wildfires and all that sort of stuff. The Camp Mabry Ordnance Shop was pretty special. They did everything there, repaired weapons, rebuilt Jeep engines, truck engines, repaired all kinds of equipment. But one of the reasons that it was so renowned is that it employed colored troops at the time, which was somewhat unusual. And it also did a lot of work with soldiers who had lost limbs in the fighting. They brought them to Camp Mabry and they trained them in useful skills that they could employ when they left the service and they went into the civilian world. So that ordnance shop was a big deal. This is a look at Camp Mabry during the war, and so you can see how much of it there's nothing there. This is still largely, you get away from the road, there's not much that's there. So this is all training ground that you would see right there. Then we get to the 1950s and the post begins to grow again. So here are those buildings along Mopac. So see, there's your railroad. There's the building. There's the parade ground, right? There's that arsenal that's right there. Headquarters over there. There's the museum. These are barracks now becoming offices. But then we begin to build more structures in just basically support structures. They build a maintenance shop right next to the highway. You can still drive past this. It's the recycling center at the PX now. But for well into the 90s, this is where they painted the vehicles and washed them and did all this kind of work here. But see how much nature is still around Camp Mabry. We're still kind of outside the city limits, but the city is heading in our direction. One of the things that a lot of old-time Austinites remember is that there used to be no perimeter fence around Camp Mabry. It was what is called an open post. Anybody could come to Camp Mabry. There were no guards. You didn't show an ID. You could drive up there. You could walk around the track. You could fish at the fishing pond. And in the corner of the post, there was a park of sorts where we had tanks, we had missiles, and this totem pole. This totem pole was given to us by Canada in the 1960s in honor of the Texans who enlisted in the Canadian Armed Forces before the U.S. entered World War II. And there are like 642 of them. And so there was a big presentation. Where did the presentation happen? In Building 6, because it was no longer owned by DPS. The Guard was using it for everything. There were offices in there. There were armories in there. There would be billets in there. For troops going through the Regional Training Academy. They dried parachutes from the rafters in the building. The post library was in there. The band practiced in there. And they had the ceremony where this was presented. We still have this. It's not on display because the termites got to it. And chewed up, the bottom like 5 feet of it, and so it was in danger of falling over. So it was taken, and it's in storage at Camp Mabry now. In the 1970s, we had the addition of a chapel That was an effort that the money was raised from the people of Texas. They donated the funds, and then the Guard took the funds and they built a chapel. And now back to Building 6. So in 1992, General Bishop, who was Adjutant General at the time, decided that we should have a museum to tell the story of the Texas military forces. And by Texas military forces, we mean the volunteer and militia units of Texas in the 19th century, starting with that first militia muster in Stephen F. Austin's colony in 1823, running through the present. So our museum has a start point, but it does not have an end point. And it's important to pay attention to the word forces in our name. That gets dropped more often than not. The Texas Military Museum or something like that. Texas Military Forces, right? The big reach, but it's a very specific reach. So we're not talking about all Texans in the military. We're not talking about all military things that ever happened in Texas. We're talking about the volunteer militia units of Texas from 1823 until 1903. After 1903, we're talking about the Texas Army Guard, the Texas Air Guard, and the Texas State Guard. Peacetime and wartime service, federalized or not. So we don't have a Marine Corps story. We only have a Texas Air Guard story. We don't have an Air Force story, right? We don't have a Navy story except for the two navies of Texas during the Revolution and the Republic. And we do tell the story of the USS Houston, which was sunk defending Java, and its survivors were merged with prisoners from the Texas National Guard and sent to the POW camps in Burma and stuff. So we sort of, adopt them as the lost battalion because they went through all of that together. But so the focus is on what the Texas troops are doing, not what Texans are doing in all the various branches of our armed forces. So this is the front of our building. It still sort of looks like a mess hall. We put these doors in about 6 years ago in the canopy. So the old white wooden doors, they're still there. They're just permanently emptied. Those glass doors pull apart like in a car dealership because we still drive vehicles in and out of there. It's just they're Jeeps and half tracks and tanks and stuff now instead of DPS cruisers and that sort of thing. What do you see inside? Well, we have the Great Hall, which is the central corridor of the museum. The 45,000 square foot building, about 26,000 square feet of it are exhibit. The rest is collection storage, manufacturing spots for building exhibits and that kind of stuff, offices and that sort of thing. We have a large collection of military vehicles inside, spanning from World War I all the way through the Korean War, the Vietnam conflict. The National Guard is not mobilized for Vietnam. A couple of Ranger companies and briefly an artillery battalion. Vietnam is a regular Army war. The National Guard stays in the United States ready to deploy to Europe if the Soviet Union invaded West Germany and started World War III. But there were lots of guardsmen who volunteered to go to Vietnam and lots of Vietnam veterans who came home and became guardsmen. So there we have a nexus there, but we don't have a Vietnam War exhibit because the Texas National Guard, Texas Air National Guard, they do not go to Vietnam. But there is a lot of equipment in here. Everybody kind of knows about the 36th Infantry Division, which is created by merging the Texas and Oklahoma National Guard together in World War I. That's the symbolism of the shoulder patch, the blue arrowhead representing Oklahoma, which before statehood, remember, was the Indian Territory, with the T for Texas superimposed on top of it. And then by the time you get to World War II, the 36 is an all Texas unit, at least when it begins. So very quickly it becomes all-American because they send recruits and draftees from all over the country into the division. But it would be known as the Texas Army throughout the entire conflict because it never would lose that Texas identity that it had when it came in. But Texas also sends 2 National Guard units, actually 3 National Guard units, to the Pacific Theater of World War II. They take the tank company away from the 36th Division. We had what were known as square divisions at the start of World War II. So 4 infantry regiments, and they had their own air squadron. They had their own tank company and that kind of stuff. They went to a triangular division. Everything came in 3. So 3 infantry regiments. At that point, they took the air and the armor out. And the armor became independent tank battalions, and the 36th Tank Company became part of the 193rd Tank Battalion that fought in the Central Pacific during World War II. They had the 112th Cavalry, which was sent initially to New Caledonia at the start of World War II. And it didn't take its horses from Texas, but when it got to New Caledonia, it got horses brought over from Australia. So it becomes the only mounted regiment in the United States Army to serve overseas in World War II. They would fight through New Guinea and the Philippines under MacArthur, but before they got into combat, they took their horses away from them again, and they made them infantry. And then you have the 124th Cavalry, which is actually the last mounted cavalry regiment in the U.S. Army. It maintained a border patrol of the Rio Grande until 1944, when it was dismounted and sent to Burma to replace Merrill's Marauders. So when they got over there, they gave them mules. So they had some livestock again, but the mules weren't for riding. They were hauling their supplies over the mountains and the jungles as they tried to reopen the Burma Road. So there's a Pacific Theater story there as well. A bunch of this equipment is operational. These Jeeps run, that American half-track, that German Hetzer tank destroyer, that Sherman tank. A lot of those weapons are actually fireable. We take them out, we do living history programs and battle reenactments with them. There's our Hetzer, that Kugelwagen works as well. And then one of the most popular exhibits in the museum is the Merci boxcar. And a lot of you might remember this from sitting down in front of the American Legion post on the shores of Lady Bird Lake, right there at Mopac, and it disappeared from there like almost a decade ago. It's like, where did that thing go? Came to the museum. So this story is really cool. After World War II, an American newspaperman named Drew Pearson set out to raise money to help the French recover from the war. He raised $2 million that went to French orphanages and schools and stuff like that. And the French were extremely grateful for that. And a French railway executive said, you know what, we need to thank the Americans. Why don't we take one of these old 40 and 8 boxcars that have been in service since the 1870s? And every doughboy in World War I would recognize these things. And they used them well into World War II and beyond, called 40 and 8 because you were supposed to fit 40 men or 8 horses into them. 40 men or 8 horses. And the doughboys would tell you, you could fit 30 mine men comfortably. The 40th guy you have to cut into thirds in order to fit him in there. But this is an iconic piece of equipment that every American soldier from World War I or World War II would associate with France. So why don't we fill these with gifts and send it to the Americans as a thank you? And these gifts they can sell or auction off, and then they can support their orphanages and hospitals and schools. And it was such a popular idea, they decided that they would actually make an entire train. There would be one of these boxcars for every state and territory. And they put them on a ship and they brought them over in 1950, and it was in Life magazine. It was a big deal. This is the boxcar that Texas got. And all these placards are the various provinces and municipalities that donated things to put inside the boxcar. And a few of those things didn't get sold or auctioned off. We have some of them on exhibit in the museum. Interestingly, this was at Camp Mabry very briefly. And then the Korean War started, and we don't have space for this kind of stuff anymore. And it went to the American Legion Post to be managed by a subset of them called the 40 and 8 Society that exists to take care of these things. And a lot of these still survive, scattered across the country. But being outside, not the best thing for this boxcar. And so eventually they asked if we would like to have it inside the museum. Absolutely. And so it came inside. Everybody likes to get their picture taken in front of that thing. And then at the other end of the museum, we have an F-84 Thunderjet. The Air National Guard was created in 1947 when the Air Force becomes an independent branch of the armed forces. The only time that the entire Texas Air National Guard has been mobilized and sent to war as a mass was in Korea. And we had just started flying jets. The F-84 was the first truly operational jet in the American inventory. It's a fighter bomber. It flew most of the attack missions, air-ground attack missions in Korea. And this is what the Texas Air National Guard flew during the Korean War. Everybody remembers MASH, right? Okay, well, this is just a happy circumstance that the ambulance is parked to the helicopter. This is not actually an air evacuation helicopter. It's an OH-23, and we were flying these in Longview, Texas, as training helicopters into the 1990s. So if you joined the regular Army even, you got sent to a Texas Guard facility to learn to fly helicopters in a 1950s era helicopter. You had to master that before they give you something much more impressive to fly. As you're going to wreck it, you wreck that, not one of the big expensive things that we make now. So And off the central corridor of the Great Hall, then we have our exhibit galleries. So again, we start with the Texas Revolution, that first militia muster in Stephen F. Austin's colony. And we'll just flip through these things very quickly. You can do a virtual tour of the museum by going to our website. You can walk through this, actually get close enough to read all these exhibit panels. We give due notice to the Texas Navy, which played a vital role in the Revolution and in the era of the Republic. Then we switch over to the war between the states and talk about what Texas troops are doing there. We have a lot of objects that were actually carried, used by Texas troops during the American Civil War. And then we flip over to the World Wars. One of the cool stories about the Texas Guard in World War I. 36th Division is formed in July of 1917. It doesn't get overseas until August of 1918. We raised 4 million troops for World War I. Only half of them get overseas before the war is over. And the Texas 36th Division doesn't go into action until the beginning of October of 1918. It sees 24 days of combat before it's pulled off the front line. It's supposed to go back into action on November 11th of 1918. And of course, that's the day the war ends. So, as far as the soldiers were concerned, that was wonderful. That was great luck, right? But the first action of the 36th Division was really a bloodbath at a place called Saint Etienne. And we were attacking through a sector that had been captured just recently from the Germans, and we were trying to exploit that breakthrough, which means we were fighting over ground the Germans had occupied for almost 4 years. And the Germans had left their field phone wire laying all over the place. Field phone wire is sound activated. So if we laid our field phone wire down, their wire would pick up the messages and could be heard by their telephones and their lines. And so we couldn't use the field phones. It's a big problem. Radio, of course, is not really a thing in World War I. And so we had to use runners, guys running across the battlefield, carrying messages. And the result of all of that was some of the units of the Battle of Saint Etienne had all of 10 minutes warning that they were supposed to attack. That is not the optimum way to run a military assault, right? So after that battle, we took very heavy casualties, pushing the Germans back. One of the officers in the 36th Division said, I think I know how to solve this field phone problem. We have lots of Choctaw Indians who are in the unit, who were in the Oklahoma National Guard, and their language has never been written down, and the Germans wouldn't know what to make of it if they heard it. So let's train them to use the field telephones. And so you put a Choctaw on one end, you put a Choctaw on the other, and they can speak in the clear. They don't even have to use a code, and the message, there's no coding, decoding, the message can be relayed very quickly. And we used it at our next engagement, a little battle called Fort Farm next to the Inn River, and it worked perfectly. And after the war, we had German prisoners, officers came and said, what was that code that you were using? It was like, oh, it's no code. So they were the original code talkers. The Marines get all the credit for code talkers. The Navajo in World War II, they are Johnny-come-latelys to the Texas National Guard. We wanted to use it again in World War II, and the War Department for some reason said, no, we don't want to do that. The Marines said, oh, we'll do it. But the Army in World War II said, no, never mind. But this is an exhibit that talks about that. We let you walk through a World War I trench, a very clean and wide World War I trench. No mud, no dead bodies, no rats or gas or anything like that. And then we get to World War II. And of course, this is the story of the 36th Infantry Division landing in the Gulf of Salerno, fighting its way up and being the first unit to go into Rome, then spearheading the invasion of southern France, and fighting their way through France toward the Franco-German border and breaching the Siegfried Line and going on into Germany and Austria, liberating the Landsberg concentration camp along the way. We captured German Field Marshal von Rundstedt. We got Hermann Göring in the exhibit. We've got some really cool stuff related to them. We got the cigarettes that were on Göring's desk when we took him prisoner, that sort of thing. And then, of course, we have a Cold War story. The interesting thing about the Texas Guard is in 1946, the War Department decided to experiment to see whether the Guard could maintain armored divisions. And so they created 2 Guard armored divisions, the 49th and the 50th. They gave the 49th to Texas. Makes a lot of sense. During World War II, what was then called Camp Hood, which becomes Fort Hood, is constructed. It's an armor training facility for tank destroyers. It's already here. Texas gets the 49th Armored Division. And then they created the 50th Armored Division. And for some reason, in the brilliance of the War Department, they gave that to New Jersey. And New Jersey could never flesh it out. In the 80s, we actually had to raise another armored brigade and attach it to the 50th Armored Division so it could be fleshed out. So we actually had Texas Guardsmen serving in the New Jersey Guard to flesh out the 50th. And so Texas becomes the only state in the Union to have two National Guard divisions. We had the 36th Infantry and we had the 49th, and we kept both of them until 1968. 1968, the height of the war in Vietnam, the Secretary of Defense, now the Department of Defense, McNamara says, no, we're going to get rid of all these guard divisions. So they break them up into individual brigades. So the troops and the equipment are still there, but the way they're organized is different. And so the 36th and the 49th divisions go away. 1973, the war in Vietnam is over. McNamara is gone, and they decide to bring back the guard divisions. But the Defense Department says, okay, Texas, you can only have one. You can only have one. And since the mission was to reinforce the 5th Corps in the Fulda Gap if the Soviets crossed the intra-German border and started World War III, the mission was heavy armor. So the 49th is what came back. The residue of the 36th hangs around as an airborne brigade, which is a roundout brigade for the 82nd Airborne Division. And the 49th stays until 2004. So the War on Terror begins. Texas is starting to deploy troops into the war, and the mission now is different, right? We don't need heavy armor. Soviet tank armies aren't the worry. Insurgents are the problem. Light infantry is what you need. So the 36th was reorganized and reflagged. The 49th was reorganized and reflagged back to the 36th. So interestingly, the 36th Infantry Division disappeared for 36 years, and then it comes back. And it's still the backbone of the Texas Army Guard. So we have a very big story about the War on Terror, and it starts there. This is cool. So the Texas Air Guard goes into action on the day the war starts. Most of us here are old enough to remember the story. The first towers hit. Everybody thinks it's a tragic accident, and that includes the men of the 111th Air National Guard Fighter Squadron at Ellington Field, who are in their ready room watching it on CNN like everybody else. Then the plane goes into the second tower, and we realize, no, that's not an accident. We are under attack. The pilots are taken out to their planes. They're put in them on that hot tarmac, beginning of September in Houston, Texas. We know what that means. Engines off, right? They're armed, they're fueled, they're ready to go. And they sit there for several hours waiting for orders. In Florida, the president has been put back in Air Force One. They've gone up to 45,000 feet to get beyond the range of any missiles or anything like that. Nobody knows how many of these civilian airliners have been hijacked. Nobody knows what the extent of this attack is going to be yet. And we think of the president's plane as having all this sophisticated high-tech communications equipment in it. It didn't then, really. And they were flying in and out of airspace where they could get reception for TV to find out what was really happening. They had to decide what to do with the president. The president wanted to go back to Washington. They said, you can't go back to Washington. Somebody's flown a plane into the Pentagon. We're not going to let you go back to Washington. So they decide that they're going to send him to Offutt Air Force Base, which is outside Omaha. It's the headquarters of the Strategic Air Command. And the facilities exist there to withstand a nuclear attack. All these very sophisticated underground bunkers with all the communication equipment that would allow the president to continue to command the armed forces, even in the midst of an atomic war. So they're going to take him there, but they don't have enough fuel to get him there. So they're going to have to go to Barksdale Air Force Base at Shreveport and land, shove everybody off Air Force One who was just along for the ride, take on provisions, and then head toward Omaha. Obviously, if you're going to come down from 45,000 square feet, you're going to come into the danger zone. The president's plane has to be protected. And so at that point, the order was given to scramble 2 jets from the Texas Air National Guard. They were told to take off. They were given a set of coordinates. They were not told what their mission was. They were simply told that you're going to escort a former member of your squadron. It didn't make any sense to them at all. until they reached the rendezvous point and they saw Air Force One, and then they remembered the president had been in the 111th Fighter Squadron during his time in the Air Guard in the 1960s. So they flew him, they escorted him to Barksdale. Air Force One landed, one of our jets landed, they took on fuel, the other jet stayed aloft on combat air patrol. That jet would go back to Houston, two more of our jets would show up. Those three jets would escort the president to Offutt Air Force Base. They would land there. He would spend 2 hours and then insist on going back to DC against the advice of all of his staff. And our jets flew him, escorted him all the way back to DC. So the very first mission of the Texas Air Guard during the advent of the War on Terror. And we have patches from the pilots who were on that mission that they wore that day. And the rubble there is from the Pentagon, where it was struck by one of the hijacked airplanes. So very, very cool stories that we have from the War on Terror. And we also have a Hall of Honor, and this is a meeting space that people come use it if you wanted to. And this is where we do promotions and retirements and that kind of stuff. The occasional news conference, the Secretary of General NATO has been there on occasion to talk about the role of the National Guard in the defense of Western ideas and Western democracy. And then outside, we have Armor Row and Artillery Park. We have a very large collection of armored vehicles, artillery pieces, armored personnel carriers, self-propelled guns. I have to throw the one in with the snow because we don't get to take that picture very often. So we'll show it off when it happens. And then out on the playground, that part that everybody sees, they drive past all the time. The newest addition is this VH-34 helicopter. And this has got a really cool story. So the first helicopter that does service for the president is in the Eisenhower administration, rather primitive helicopters at first. He started taking them to his farm at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And when he started to do that, the media threw a fit. Oh, the president has to have a helicopter. That's ridiculous. So he can get out there and play golf a little bit quicker. Eisenhower's real reason for wanting that is to avoid shutting down the traffic in D.C. with his motorcade. He didn't want to inconvenience people, so if he flew, he wouldn't do that. A few months after he started using helicopter, the Russians launched Sputnik, and suddenly everybody understood maybe the president might need to get out of Washington, D.C. in a great big hurry sometime if there was a nuclear bomber on its way. And so the next helicopter that Eisenhower got to fly was called a VH-34. This is the VIP version of the Choctaw helicopter, which was one of the workhorses of the U.S. military, both Army, Marines, and Navy. And he flew this exact helicopter. And John F. Kennedy flew this exact helicopter. And we have pictures, right tail number, Kennedy, Jackie Kennedy, McNamara, Rusk, all of the big names of the Kennedy administration. We've got pictures of them in and around this helicopter. This helicopter eventually ages out. It retires. They get new helicopters for the Nixon administration. Everybody thinks that the president flies in Marine One. And from Nixon on, that's what he flies. But before Nixon, this was a joint Army-Marine mission. And so the Marines flew the president one day and the Army flew him the next. And whatever helicopter he was in was designated one. So he flew Army One or Marine One. And this is the Army One. The distinctive paint job that we all think this is what the president's helicopter looks like is practical. There was no climate control. There was no air conditioning. So they painted it, the top of it white to reflect the heat from the engines and the sun. And then it just becomes the tradition, right? That this is what a presidential helicopter should look like. This, after it retires from federal service, is given to the Texas Army Guard to use as a VIP transport. And so it flew former President Lyndon Johnson around on occasion, and it flies into the 80s. And then it's retired and it's sent to a boneyard at Edwards Air Force Base out in California. And it's sitting out there in the desert, just sort of fading back into nature when the Combat Aviation Brigade of the 36th Infantry Division is being mobilized in 2007 to go take part in the surge in Iraq. And they were mobilizing in California, and the commander of that unit went to the museum at Camp Edwards, got to talking to their curator. He said, "Hey, I got something to show you." And they walk out to the boneyard, and he showed him this helicopter, which still had a great big Texas Air National Guard insignia on it. He said, "This used to be the president's helicopter." And so he got a hold of me, and I went and begged the adjutant general for $6,000 to, pick this thing up and haul it to Texas. And he agreed. So we brought it in, and we spent half a decade or better restoring it. It's been on exhibit on the parade ground now for a couple of years. And so this is a really fascinating intersection of presidential and Texas National Guard history. And so we're really proud to have that added to the collection. And as I said, a lot of our collection is operational. We can't fly that presidential helicopter, unfortunately, but we can run our Sherman tank. We do a couple events every year where it goes out. The next one of these is coming up over Veterans Day weekend. We call it Close Assault 1944. We take out the Sherman, the half-tracks, the Jeeps, artillery pieces, demonstrate weapons and tactics and that sort of thing. In March, we'll do a Civil War event. In Memorial Day weekend, we'll do a Vietnam event, run our 113 armored personnel carriers and trucks and that kind of thing. As I said, the Texas Guard doesn't go to Vietnam, but a lot of Texas Guardsmen do go, and a lot of Vietnam vets come back and serve in them. And this is our nexus with them. This is the way that we honor their service to our country. We do in March a World War I event over there in 1918. And then we have a big living history weekend every April. It's got a really big World War II battle reenactment with it, airplanes, 150 troops or so. And we do a timeline of history. So we'll have from the Texas Revolution through the present, and weapons, demonstrations, muskets and artillery from the Civil War and that kind of stuff. And then the event that we did this last Saturday, we do close to July 4th every year, Hands-on History. So it's an evening event where we actually let people come into the museum. Our living history detachment is there. People get to pick up and hold the weapons and that kind of stuff. They're not behind plexiglass boxes anymore. And we let them get into the tanks and to the cockpits, which is what everybody always wants to do. Usually we can't do that, but we facilitate it. So if you ever want to be in a Sherman tank or climb in that fighter jet or this helicopter or something like that, every July is your opportunity to do that. I'm sorry?
Is it coming up?
We just did it. Just did it last Saturday. We usually do it on the Saturday closest to July 4th. This year we had something else going on July 4th. We did a big thing during the day. So we did it on the 11th. But next year, close to July 4th, you'll have your chance again. And so the story of the Texas Military Forces in Camp Mabry, museum is free. It's open daily to the public. We close on Christmas. We close on Thanksgiving. Otherwise, we're open. If you're looking for something to do with friends and family during the holidays, it won't cost you a penny. Camp Mabry is an open post. We are operating under different security situation now. We have been for a little bit more than a year. And the active hostilities with the Iranians started. If you have a U.S. issued ID, driver's license, state issue ID card, U.S. passport, U.S. visa or something, you can come to Camp Mabry. You'll go through the entry control point. You'll show your ID. They'll do a quick background check on the DPS database. If you got a traffic ticket, don't worry, that won't keep you out. You have to be a sex offender or a recent felon or something. That's the only reason they'll turn around. But right now, we do not allow foreign guests onto Camp Mabry. So if you don't have a U.S. visa, your passport's not going to get you on. And being from Mexico and Canada is not going to get you on. It's just the security environment that we live in at the moment. So we don't know how long those restrictions will remain in place. If I was going to guess, I wouldn't look for them to disappear anytime in the near future. But I think most of you don't look like terrorists. I don't see any sex offenders or felons. So all of you would be able to come up to the museum. The hours are 10 to 4. The outside stuff is open from dawn to dusk. And by the way, if you want to walk the track, you want to fish the pond, you can still do that. You can come to Camp Mabry and do that. When you come through, you just tell the guards, this is where I'm going. They'll do that background check. They'll give you, it takes just a minute or two, depending on the line. They'll give you a little pass to put on your dashboard and you're good to go. So there's really no excuse for not coming to see us and seeing us as often as you want. It's not going to cost you anything. And, that's one thing. A museum is not a cheap thing to run. It's, in fact, a very expensive thing to run. Each one of these living history programs will cost us about $3,000 every time that we put one of them on. We get the most minimal budget from the state of Texas. So we have, until recently, we only had 3 employees. I just got a 4th one after 19 years. I got a 4th employee. It's like Christmas. 3 years ago, they started to give me a discretionary budget of $6,000 a year to buy curatorial supplies and paint and these sorts of things. Our utilities are paid for, our maintenance is paid for, our security is paid, all because we're on Camp Mabry. So it's not like they're not doing something for us. They're doing a lot, right? But it's just not, that said, all museums, I don't care if we're talking about the Smithsonian or yours, have the same problem. There's not enough space, there's not enough people, there's not enough money. That's the rule of being a museum, right? But that said, we like to think that we're a really good bargain for the people of Texas. And every once in a while, somebody comes in and says, well, if you need money, charge people to come in. And I'm like, well, that's more complicated than you think. First off, if we're going to start to take money, you have to hire another employee to be in charge of all the money, and all the money will go to that employee. So it's sort of a zero-sum game, right? But the bigger idea there is you wouldn't charge the soldiers whose story you're telling. You wouldn't charge the veterans whose story you're telling. You wouldn't want to charge full price to kids, and so it's weird, right? But more than that, it's not tradition to charge admission to museums that are on military installations. But the bigger idea, and what I always tell people is, admission price has already been paid for everybody. It's been paid by the service and the sacrifice, and sometimes the lives, the blood, and the pain of the families of the servicemen and women who've laid down their lives for us. That's the admission price. And nobody should have to drop a penny to find out what our Texas troops have done for us and what they are doing for us. And that's usually the end of the argument. They're like, yeah, we're not going to charge admission. Somebody did ask a question before we got it, so I know it'll get asked again, so I'll just go ahead and answer it. You don't have to worry about Camp Mabry becoming a new Arbor Walk or something like that. The central component of the post is on the Register of Historic Places. Because if you go back to 1892, there's quite a history there, right? And so that's the part that everybody would want, right there on Mopac, the flat ground. The rest of it is hills and ravines and woods. The deer, we have a huge deer population. They love it, but it's not something somebody would want to build on. The last great effort to try and get the state to sell that land so it could be turned into a development was in the 1990s when George W. Bush was governor, and he put the kibosh on that. And the Guard has spent an enormous amount of money building Camp Mabry into the kind of facility that it needs. The Joint Operations Center is there. That's the think of the TV movie where everybody goes when bad things, natural or man-made, are happening. That's where everybody shows up to coordinate the response and that sort of stuff. The secure communications with the Department of War and the President, all that's there. That's not going to get yanked up and sent someplace else. So Camp Mabry will remain a military installation. What used to be well outside the city limits is right in the middle of it. Our neighbors sometimes are a little distressed by that. We're flying helicopters in there. We're booming away at a battle reenactment. It only happens a little bit. And they would rather have the woods alongside. When 9/11 happened, they threw up the perimeter fence. And they started checking IDs and stuff. We were closed off to the public for just 3 months. And then, reopened with new security procedures and stuff. But one of the funny stories is we have a lot of houses that back up to the west side of the post, right? And that's the wooded, ravine side of the post. So there's not really much that's over there. Some trails, that the troops can use, and security when they check the perimeter and stuff. And when they put up the fence, somebody got upset because we cut them off from their marijuana garden. It's like, that's pretty smart. You gotta do that. Put it on a military installation. No, right? They didn't actually complain, obviously. But yeah. There's a lot of cool history at Camp Mabry, and perhaps the coolest thing about it is we keep making the history. Right? We make history every minute of every day. What I just said is now history, isn't it? And so as long as there's Texas, there'll be Texas military forces. As long as those military forces exist, they will make history, peacetime and wartime. And our job is to collect that history, to preserve that history, to tell those stories, to commemorate the service and the sacrifice of the men and women of the Texas Military Forces. And so we invite you to come out and see us. If you want to wait till November when it's a little bit cooler, maybe, and see the Sherman tanks run and hear machine gun shoot and stuff like that, you can wait till then or come out now and then come back. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Did I hear you correctly? You said that land was purchased in 1892.
1892 is the first muster. So the land's purchased slightly before then. Some of it's donated, some of it's purchased.
Do you recall who the previous?
Yeah, we got all those records. Trust me, there are few things at Camp Mabry that are as well documented and whose ancient history has been dredged forward more times than one would think. So every time somebody says, "Oh, you know what, we should sell this land," and all that, and there is nothing in the deeds or anything that says if you decide you want this land, it goes back to that's myth. That's not true.
And so the next cannon shoot is in November.
Veterans Day weekend.
How many acres is it?
Camp Mabry is 500 some odd acres, so it's the same size as Zilker Park. Yes.
Part of that acreage, what was known as the Travis County Poor Farm.
Was known as what?
Poor Farm.
So I couldn't point to exactly what part of it without going back and looking at all this. I don't know. Yes, sir.
You had a great slide, kind of looking from the west over the rail lines.
Mhm.
You said it was in the 1950s. And there was some kind of facility on the east side that I didn't recognize.
So
What that was.
yeah, we'll go back because this is still wait this. And then I go backwards. So on the other side of Camp Mabry is I throw the right button. Is something called Camp Clark. And it's not actually a military installation. It belongs to the Texas Department of Highways. Highway Department is over there. And so it's kind of like a workshop for them. You go back there. Yeah. This stuff over here.
No, I was actually talking about right across from the long barracks buildings.
This
Yes, or straight.
this
across.
over here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's got nothing to do with us. I'm not quite sure what those buildings are now.
The Austin State Hospital.
It's the Cologne State Hospital.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. Oh,
Is it gone?
Yes.
yeah, it's gone.
Ring the bell.
Yeah.
Think of that.
Yeah. Most things around us are not the way they were.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, I believe that's it.
Yeah, I mean, so that's 35th Street down there. And yeah, I think you're right because
Bull Creek coming
this
out.
Bull Creek, right, is there and 45th Street is over here. Yeah, it's
That's the Grove.
the Grove now. Brand new. Yes, sir.
What is the current mission of the BK Armory and how is it related to them?
So one of the cool stories of the Texas Guard is at the dawn of the Cold War. Before the ICBMs came into place, the threat was, of course, bombers carrying atomic weapons. And as President Eisenhower famously said, you might shoot down 99 out of 100 of those, but the one that gets through is going to be able to do a lot of damage, right? So the United States developed something called the Nike missile batteries. And they were anti-aircraft missile batteries that were designed to knock down Soviet bombers. And of course, Soviet bombers aren't going to come across the Atlantic or Pacific. They're going to come over the poles, right? If you think the world is a globe, Siberia is really close to Alaska. They're going to come down that way. And so we had the Nike missile batteries were run by the Guard. We had several of them. There was one out at what was Bergstrom Air Force Base at the time. There's the one at Bee Caves. There was one up around Denison to protect the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. Why is the one at Bee Caves? Because that was the highest ground that you could find. And so you put the missile on the highest ground, which then, of course, extends its range, right? It's already got an advantage when it fires the missiles. I've talked to the guys who man those Nike batteries. They're pretty cool. So the initial strategy was that you would use an air burst. So these are nuclear tipped anti-aircraft missiles. You would explode your nuke over the Soviet bomber force. The down pressure would break the wings off the airplanes. They go plummeting to the ground. And then somebody realized, well, their atomic bombs have proximity fuses, which means when they get to a certain distance from the ground, a little radar says, now's the time to go boom, right? So you're just changing where that bomb's going to drop if you knock the wings off the plane. So they changed the tactic to popping the nuke in the midst of the formation, just incinerating it. And the men who manned those batteries were adamant that they would have stopped any bomber attack that had ever come their way. And radiation, airburst is better than a ground burst. Let's just say that. So today it's still a Guard armory. The old installations are the concrete, bunkers and pads for launching those. And they've got a Nike that's right there at the gate. That's pretty cool to look at. But it's just at the current moment, the force that's there is the WMD force, weapons of mass destruction force. So if something like that happens, biological, chemical, nuclear, those are the guys who roll out to deal with it, to figure out actually what it is and begin the countermeasures for it. That's who's there now.
Is it a headquarters facility?
The unit is based there. So again, it's the Guard, so you don't have men sleeping in barracks at night. So it's their armory. That's where they go to drill. Their headquarters element is there. But they go to marry their equipment and then go off to do whatever it is that they need to do.
That's a huge issue for us politically out here, the ETJ and this annexation, because there's some language about proximity to military installation.
Mm-hmm.
And that bee cave armory affects a lot of things.
Yeah.
Very, very.
Yeah. So, if you didn't have the unit there, it would be a historic site, a very important historic site, and one of the best maintained Nike sites that still exist in Texas. Because the ones up around DFW and the one at Burke, they're gone. So this is, I'm pretty sure it's the only one that still exists in Texas. They've got a really well preserved one out in San Francisco that's still got the missiles and the launchers and stuff like that.
Is there active training out there?
Well, the Guard trains in many different ways, but yes, there will be training that goes on at that armory. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
What is that? That he was just talking about.
Crystal Drive.
So if you know where the County Line barbecue place is out on 2222, it's very close. Yeah.
2244.
Yeah.
It's right at St. Well, the Nike Armory missiles are over on the south side of Bee Cave Road, kind of by Crystal Mountain.
Somewhere Drive.
But the armory is at St. Stephen's Road, right by the Orthodox Church. St. Stephen's Road goes into Rob Roy. Up on the top of the hill.
You
there.
don't have to dig very deep in most places to find military history.
So, Victor Davis Hanson, he's a World War II historian.
And more.
What?
And more.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's a very, very, very good and very famous historian. Yes. Yeah. But I do not know him, unfortunately.
Oh, I figured.
I know who he is. Yeah. And he doesn't know who I am. So yeah. Yes, sir.
My grandfather was one of the adjutants. I got that earlier. When he returned from World War II, couple of stories I'll skip one, but he was very active in the Guard as well as in the Texas Senate. And I am told he was chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. He's the one that got the DPS out of Camp Mabry and financed the headquarters building of the DPS on North Lamar.
Which I'm sure the GPS was arguing for, absent of any desire of the Guard to get them out of Camp Mabry.
So it was,
Yeah.
So it's-
Yeah.
have a coastal.
Any other questions?
This is just a comment.
Mhm.
I've taken my grandsons, my husband and I took our grandsons to it.
Thank you. We like to hear that.
Side outside.
We're never done. So it changes. We hope to get a new wing at some point because we're out of room, and there's a 21st century story to tell. And
One quick question.
Mhm.
So the period 1836 to 1846, when Texas was an independent nation. What about the frontier border security with Indians and that sort of thing? What Texas forces were involved?
so you had the ranging companies, and so the concept of the rangers comes from that. Literally, ranging companies, mounted patrols, basically, that roamed the frontier, and to either as a deterrent or as a response force to any deprivations by the Comanches, mostly. And then when you got one of the reasons that Texas joins the Union is because these ranging forces were not really capable of dealing with the problem. The idea is that if we join the Union, then the United States Army will come down here and it will take care of the problem. And 1/4 of the United States Army did come down here, and that proved insufficient as well. And so one of the reasons Texas leaves the Union is that didn't work out. You didn't keep your promise. You didn't solve this problem. Why are we in the Union if you're not solving the primary problem that we wanted you to solve? That was one of the justifications. And so during the Civil War, of course, the Union Army's gone, and you have the Texas state troops that take on that role. And these are mostly the citizens of the border counties, but also Texans who couldn't bring themselves to support the Confederacy, but would serve Texas to defend the Texas frontier against a common enemy. And so technically they're Confederate, but really they're and then after the Civil War is over, the Army comes back and has to deal with that through the rest of the 1860s and into the 1870s before the Comanche principally are defeated and the problems on the borders mostly go away. The Rio Grande stays a constant problem. And so one of the things, if you study military history in a wide enough spectrum of military history, you realize how much things don't change at all. Soldiers always need the same stuff. They need a uniform, they need a weapon, a way to carry their food, their water, their ammunition, right? It's what it looks like and what it's made of changes, but those basic tools are always the same. And military problems stay the same. And for Texas, from the very beginning, the border has always been a problem. Where the border was moves, but the Rio Grande from 1836 on is a problem. And so the ranger companies were down there, both as military units and law enforcement. During the 19-teens, you've got the whole mobilization, the first mobilization of the entire Guard that goes down to the border while Pershing's going into Mexico after Pancho Villa. Even during World War II, the 124th Cavalry spends most of the war riding up and down the Rio Grande as a security measure. So in the deployment of modern deployment. So, we are very much still in the war on terror. We're sending troops overseas all the time. The largest deployment of the Texas Guard in its entire history was the response to Hurricane Harvey. 14,000 men and women at one time were sent to deal with the aftermath of that calamity. And then the current operations on the border are the second largest deployment of Guard troops. So the more things change, the more some things stay the same. But nation states are principally territorial defense units. That's why they come into existence, to keep the people on that side of the river coming this side of the river and taking our stuff. And thus is the purpose of armies and military forces ever since. Yes, ma'am.
And when you talked about November, open house, don't they also have the Mighty Texas Dog Walk, the service dogs out there in November around?
They do. I don't know the date of it, but yeah, every year that happens. There are runs and things that happen on Camp Mabry all the time, and various competitions and stuff like that. So Camp Mabry is still very much a sort of community asset. maybe not as central as it was in the 1890s when there wasn't anything else to do, but come out and watch the soldiers. But yeah, no, it's still, and it very much wants to have that role in the Austin community.
All this stuff is on the website.
Yes, we have a very robust website. It has a whole lot of history on it, entire books about the 36th Division and other Texas Guard units. We have all the World War I service cards. So at the end of World War I, every state typed up a little index card about every citizen from that state who served in World War I in any capacity. And most states eventually sent theirs to the National Archives. We are one of 4 states that kept ours. And the Mormon Church came in and scanned them 25 years ago and gave us copies of all the scans on 5.5-inch floppies. So that's how long ago it was. But they have in the last decade put all that online, and you can go to a link on our website. And if you have a World War I veteran who was a Texan and went into the military, you should be able to call up his card. They'll give you his name, his address, whether he was drafted, enlisted, whether he was white or whether he was colored, what his serial number was, what his ranks were, what units he was in, did he go overseas, was he wounded, that kind of stuff. Yeah. You had a question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask if, I want to find out some information on the 36th Division, just search my grandmother's service. So is the museum the best place to go?
We are, yes. So we don't have service records. Okay, the service records at the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis. We had a giant fire in the 70s that destroyed millions of records, mostly Army from the middle of the alphabet. And none of that's digitized. So think of the end of Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark and the Great Big Warehouse. You can send a request in, and some guy's got to go find the box and pull it off of a shelf. And but at the end of World War II, they took German prisoners of war and they gave them the division personnel records, and they typed up little index cards. They had a name, an address, any medals, killed, wounded, missing, and what units within the 36 they were in. So we have those. It doesn't tell you much, but it tells you something. And then if you know what unit they're in, on our website, we have the after action reports for the division throughout all of World War II. So if he's in the 141st, you can go look at their AAR and the day by day on sometimes hour by hour what the 141st is doing and experiencing. So it probably, unless he's an officer, it's unlikely to mention his name, but you will get a window into it. Yeah, and the 141st is one of the better ones. The quality of after action reports depend very much on the guy who got assigned to writing them, and if he was really into it or not so much into it, and he sort of like did the bare minimum or really. And 141st is one that they were really lathering in the details too. Yes, ma'am.
My father was a commander at Camp Mabry for the 49th Armored Division. And at the time that he had it, he was in charge of New Mexico, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Texas. And when he went to summer camp, we never saw him for the summer because he had to be there.
Yeah.
But he loved armor. I mean, we called them his toys because I had to go look at Grandpa's new toys.
Well, having driven my fair share of tanks, there is a mystique to it for sure. They're also incredibly dangerous beasts to be around, whether they're shooting at you or not. Yeah.
He helped design a new Abrams tank.
So,
It's not new
and
anymore.
we have the first version of the Abrams in our exhibit. Yeah. Yes, sir. Back and back. You're going to have to speak up. It does not become part of the 36. So the 442nd Regiment / 100th Battalion are the famous Nisei from World War II. The 100th Battalion is the Hawaiian National Guard. And the 442nd are Nisei, second generation Americans who enlisted or were drafted, some of them right out of the detention facilities, into the U.S. Army. They become one of the most famous units. In World War II, they fight in Italy and southern France, so they're in the same theater as the 36. In the fall of 1944, they are briefly attached to the division. So not part of it, but attached to it. So it's sort of think of it as a reinforcement. And they're fighting through the Vosges Mountains. It was really bad weather, really tough fighting. And that is where the 1st Battalion, 141st Infantry, plunges through a hole in the German lines and then gets cut off for a week behind enemy lines. It manages to hold on for that time. We've got a lot of artifacts. We did a symposium with some of the veterans of that engagement. It's really impressive stuff. So they're heavily wooded. The weather is so bad, no plane is flying on the entire Western Front. And they've got one radio, and that's their one link back to the division. The division's throwing everything it has to try and break through to them, and nothing's working. The German defenses and the terrain are really tough. Lieutenant Erwin Blonder, who's the forward artillery observer with the 141st, has his SCR 300 radio, which is the walkie-talkie. The one you hold in your hand is a handy-talkie. The one you put on your back is a walkie-talkie. And the battery on that thing is only supposed to last a day. And he made it last a week by only turning it on when he had to transmit, then turning it off. So we knew where they were. It was trying to get to them. If they had wounded, they were running out of ammunition, they were out of food, running out of supplies. So at first they tried to fire supplies to them in artillery shells. So they take out the explosive, put rations and ammo in it, and they would fire them into the not really the way you want to get resupplied, is to have artillery shells. And it really didn't work. And so then they took one of the fighter squadrons armed with P-47s, and these were dive bombers, and they took the external fuel tanks and they cut a door in it, stuffed the supplies in, bailey wired it shut, and then dive bombed them into the perimeter. Again, the weather is so bad. They're the only people flying in Europe, that squadron, trying to get through to our battalion. One of the pilots flew Nuno Mountain, got killed. Another was shot down coming back toward our lines. They were flying at treetop level because that's the only way that they could see. And our anti-aircraft people thought these were bad guys coming. They shot him down. He survived. The rest of them, got through the mission, and enough of the belly tanks got into the perimeter to keep them going. We have one of those belly tanks in the exhibit that was recovered from the battlefield. But the people who finally broke through are the 442nd 100th. They had already been in very heavy combat, and they've been relieved to take a break. And General Dahlquist, who was in command of the division at the time, didn't want to use them, but it was the only thing he had left. And so he threw them in, and they broke through. And there's film footage of all of this. It's a really cool story. And all the Nisei were declared honorary Texans by the men of the 36th for breaking through and getting them out. Some people say they rescued. We don't say rescued, relieved. They didn't need to be rescued. They needed to be relieved. So they broke through to them. So it's a great story. And when we did the symposia, Blonder was there. His feet got so badly frostbitten during the siege that when they took him off the line, and there's film footage of him coming out on a stretcher, they flew him immediately to the United States, not even a stop in England. So he goes with everything he's got. So he has the maps that he carried during the siege. And we've got those on exhibit now. And he got them because they flew him straight back to the States. And he got really lucky because they took him to a hospital in Chicago, and his feet were so bad they were about to amputate them. And a doctor looks at it and says, no, I can save those feet. And he did. His feet were sensitive for the rest of his life, but he had them. We had some of the Nisei there. We had some of the men who were cut off there. And so one of the really special things about my job is I get to meet lots of veterans and hear their stories. So on September 20th, which is Sunday, they have this big thing here in Austin called Austin Museum Day. You may have heard of it. There's free admission to all the museums, and we're part of that, although we're free all the time. But we are going to have World War II veterans at the museum that day, and hopefully a couple from the 36 who were captured at the Rapido and Salerno, who went to the POW camps. So we don't know for sure yet. And of course, at their age, a commitment in July does not necessarily mean that an arrival at the end of September, but we certainly hope so. And so this is a fading opportunity to meet World War II veterans, right? And to hear their stories and to thank them for their service. So you might want to keep an eye on our website. We'll have more details as we work out the program and we know who's actually coming. But September 20th, Sunday, Austin Museum Day at the Texas Military Forces Museum.
One last question.
Mhm.
So if we as a group raise $1,000 that we could donate to, could y'all let Ellen fire one of the?
Like I said, you never
No,
know what this.
I'll bet you if you came out on Living History Weekend, we could get you a ride in a Sherman tank.
Oh, my gosh. Jeff, you're a fabulous presenter. Oh my gosh, the history that you know, and what an incredible place the museum is. I know from being there, but seeing some of the displays again. So there definitely is going to be a big field trip in the future of this group, or go out on your own. Oh, it's open from 10 to
10 to 4
Monday
daily.
So every day.
Don't come on Christmas.
And used to be you had to go to the 45th Street entrance. Is that?
They will turn you away at 45th Street. So you have to come in the 35th Street entrance at Maintenance Drive. There are detailed driving directions on our website.
Okay. Check the website, 35th Street.
Where's the website?
Hmm?
What's the website?
www.texasmilitaryforcesmuseum.org. All lowercase, one word.
Remember to put forces in there.
Yes.
Learned that today. For sure, learned that today. Thank you so much. Jeff's going to be around for a few minutes, so you can ask additional questions. I want to say a special welcome to the visitors today that we did not introduce, but thank you for being here. James, thank y'all for being here. Let me see, Kristen, you and your boys, Ann, glad to have you here.